All right, we're back. It is COMP125, and it's week 5, part 4 of our broadcast in the summer 2016 semester for Centennial College client-side web development. We just finished talking about a bunch of stuff. It was kind of a longer recording. And one of the things we talked about here was, this is my fix, by the way. For people who are watching it, this is the fix for all the problems you have on Azure. You can put this in if you actually look at COMP125 lesson 5. And if you include a web.config file in the root of your folder, it'll take away all the problems that Azure gives you with Font Awesome. Okay, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about how to use different methodologies to query the page, right? One of them is document.getElementById, right? That's one of them. So if I look at all the different ones, they're all listed here. We've done getElementById, we've done getElementBy by class name, we've done getElementBy by name, by tag name, and query selector all. We never use write, because that's just like, it's terrible, right? Other things, different properties, the part of the document, we've used the body property and the title property. Those are important to kind of understand how to use those. And the URL, gives us the URL, so we're not going to do those. And they give examples on the PowerPoint of stuff we've already done, right? So I'm just going to skip through. Get elements by tag name, again, it gives us an array of elements. So in order for us to access one of the elements, we need to use the square bracket notation, just like we do with arrays, right? So there's no difference here in terms of the way we access it. Query selector and query selector all. There's two different ones, query selector and query selector all. Query selector only does one query from one single selector, and we use the reference is exactly the CSS syntax again. So again, even with query selector, CSS syntax, and we don't have to use the square bracket notation for a single option we want to access, right? This is very useful if you just want one thing we want to access. But if you want more than one, then we use query selector all. That does the same thing, same syntax we use in CSS. We get an array of elements that this query matches. All right, that's what that does. Talked about the text content already. Here's something else. The style property, what it does, again, is it allows us to change the CSS style, and we can use different properties of the CSS style, for example, display, or color, or whatever else there is, border. Whatever you can think of that you can put in CSS, you can use style.display and then equals to whatever it is that you want to change in quotations. Yeah. That's something else. That's another topic altogether. Font family, right, and so on. You can see that there's a bunch of CSS properties we can change with the style methodology, style dot and whatever the style we want to change. We've covered that. Here's something we haven't covered, and I should cover it before we go. The idea of adding or removing elements. One of the ways we can do it is this create element idea. So let's say, for example, I want to create an element inside my page without using inner HTML, right? Okay, so I create an element. But where does this element go when I add an element? Well, at the beginning, it doesn't go anywhere. We create an element. We haven't added it to the page yet, right? So the first thing is we use the create element to create the element we want, okay? And then we attach the element by using append child. Append child takes the element we created, whatever the child is that we created, and appends it to whatever the parent node we want. An example of this would be, let's suppose we looked at our index.html, right? And we have a div tag with a class of row, right? That's the parent. And I want to append to the parent, to the to this div with a class of row, another paragraph tag, a second paragraph, right? Let's do that. So how do I code that on my app.js? Well, I've got my query selector, right? Let's change this a little bit. So we'll do something like this. Var, we'll call this second paragraph. We don't have it yet, but we will. Second paragraph, right, is equal to, we just use query selector instead of query selector all. Document query selector. And inside my query selector, I want to say a div tag with a class of row, as an example, any div tag with a class of row is the actual second paragraph. That's the actual parent. Let's call this parent. Parent element, right? And so that's the parent element that I'm attaching. And what I want to do is something like this. I want to say parent element dot append child, and then I can append child the node that I want to add, whatever the node is called. I don't have that node yet. Let's add it in. So I can say something like this, just like the syntax what we just got, right? Document.create element and whatever the element's called, right? So go back. And again, I want to name it. So I want to say something like var, second paragraph equal to document dot create element, right? Create element, and I want to make another paragraph tag. Here's my paragraph element, right? And what I want to take is I want to take the second paragraph and dump it into here. I want to append this second paragraph to the parent element, which happens to be a div with the class of row. The first div with the class of row, because it's not query selector all, it's query selector, right? Okay, now I want to take, now that I've got that, my second paragraph, I have access to that second paragraph, right? I can say, I can do another query. I can do var, well, my second paragraph, whatever the second paragraph is, let's say second paragraph dot text content, and I can say something like is equal to second paragraph. But I have to do this piece. I should probably do that before I add it in, right? And so here's, I find the parent element. This is the parent node that I want to inject something into. Then I declare my element that I want to create, my paragraph element, and its content, whatever it is. Then I take the parent element, which is this div row, and then append child, use my append child method to add the second paragraph onto it. It's going to appear after the first one. Let's try this out. Right?
You can also, change the attributes of the second paragraph.
Oh yeah, change the attributes. You can add an ID. You can do whatever you want, right? The idea here is you can create any elements you want, even if it doesn't exist. If I do a look at elements now, if I look at the body, you can see that under my div class of container, I have a div of row. Inside my div of row, I have two paragraphs. One, the first paragraph, and the one I've added in. It physically adds another element into my page, and I can have as many of those as I want, anywhere I want, as long as I can target it exactly with my JavaScript. Everything, anything you want. So that's really what I'm doing here. I'm adding in, like here the idea is exactly the same what we did. List is document.getElementById, by ID, whatever the nav list is. Contact is we've created a new list item, right? And list append child to the contact to the list. So now my navigation bar adds a list item to my navigation. That's what this is doing, right? But first we create it, then we add it. And it's exactly what we've done. Basically, we added on. When I use append, I added on to the end of a node list, right? In this particular case, in our example, our node list has the first paragraph, which is right here, right? And an h1 tag. The div includes an h1 tag, a paragraph, and now another one. It always adds it onto the end. Append adds it onto the end. Okay? Okay. We can also cloning nodes. I don't do this as much, the clone node method. I don't use that as much, to be honest with you, in real life, right? Contact that clone node. All it does is copy the node again, and then you'd modify the copied node however you like, especially if you want to copy everything that's there. Like, for example, if you want to copy the style if the node includes things like a list item and an anchor tag and an icon, all those things get copied, right? So if you, for that particular reason, you might want to use clone node, but typically we don't do that. Here's another one. We did append, adds after, and insert before, adds before, right? But again, parent node, if I go insert before the parent node, what am I inserting it? Well, here's my existing child node, whatever the existing child node is, for example, my first child, right? And I want to take my new child and insert it before my existing child, right? That's how it works. And here's a really good example of that, where I have a list, top nav, and here are my directions, right? That's my new list item that I'm adding in, my directions, right? And I also want to use query selector all to get access to the first element inside my list item. So that's my first element. And what I'm doing is I'm saying, hey, insert before about us my directions, right? So instead of appending to the end, you can insert it wherever you want, right? Based on insert before. So how does that translate for us? If we were going to do an example, if I want to insert the second paragraph before my first paragraph, I'd have to do a query selector to find all paragraphs within a class of row. That would be the first one. And then I would say insert before that one, right? That's inside my parent. So instead of append child, right, here's my div row, but I want to insert before my paragraph. So I can do something like this, var first paragraph is equal to document query selector div with a class of row first paragraph, right? My first paragraph, and it's the first one that it's going to get. So this is my first paragraph. Here's my second paragraph, and instead of append child, I can use in my parent element, I can use insert before. This we use. And what child am I inserting? Second paragraph. And what child am I inserting before? First paragraph. So now, if you notice what I'm seeing here, I've got my second paragraph here, my first paragraph here. But if I refresh, my second paragraph, my first paragraph are reversed. So I can insert that one before my other one by getting a reference to it with my query selector. Okay. And we're timing out, but more or less, this PowerPoint talks about these different things: how to remove a node. I'm going to remove my child, remove child, and I target that. First, I do a query. I get a reference to my node, and then I use remove child to get rid of it. So I can add and remove elements. So I'm using JavaScript not just to traverse the DOM, but go in there and modify what's in there. I can change anything in my page, right? Why would I want to do that? Because then I can create almost like this a dynamic effect to the page. And the window object, I haven't had a chance to cover. So from about number 43 in my slide deck to the end, I want to cover this next week. Even though we covered it a lot of, we kind of injected a couple of other things, like I talked about, which is kind of an additional thing. I talked about Bower, right? And that's the additional thing you're getting this week. Well, it took the place of some of this stuff, so we're going to push this stuff off to next week. Okay. And by the way, from a timeline perspective, for those people who are interested in knowing the timeline again, nothing has really changed. If I go to COMP125, just one really quickly to see our timeline. Remember, our assignments are a little different, but the actual timeline, we're sitting at week 5 and we're hitting DOM, right? Just like we normally would. So everything we covered is pretty much in line with what we're covering. Week 6, next week, we're going to hit enhancing and validating forms, and we'll hit that little piece about window and the window, right? We'll hit that. Week 7 is supposed to be using object-oriented JavaScript, but remember that week 7 is where I'm going to have my little midterm test. So chances are, I'm just putting it out there, that on week 7, I'm going to probably include things like a review on one day about all the stuff that's going to be on the test on day 1, and then day 2 we'll do the test. So chances are we're going to have to move some of this content, object-oriented JavaScript, to the second half of the semester. Only because I want to do a good review so you guys get all really, really good on your exam, right? For those people who are having trouble with HTTP server, and I know, Xavier, you're having trouble with HTTP server, before I go for the day, remember that node, npm, if I go to npm HTTP server, I go npm modules. And if I go to HTTP server, one you might want to try if HTTP server is not working for you. I go HTTP server. Note that there's a bunch of different ones. One of them that's really popular is Tiny HTTP server. Try that instead. Instead of installing HTTP server, you can install Tiny HTTP server if that works. And if it doesn't work for you, that means your port is blocked, right? And that's the problem. Yeah. No. So if I was going to do this before you guys go, yeah. So let's say, for example, if I was going to install Tiny HTTP server, I would just do the same thing: npm install -g Tiny, another module, right? HTTP server. Going to go out to the web, grab that module, and install it. You can do this, right? And then to run it, I would just do the same thing: tiny-http server, and then listening on a different port, which may not give you the error, 3333. So then if I go to here, that's why I suggested it to you, and if I go localhost 3333, then I still got. Did I make it wrong? Oh, it crapped out. I just want to see what happens when I refresh. Yeah, it craps. That one craps out. Don't use that one. So that just craps out completely, right? And sometimes it's the usage. If you go to usage, you can decide on the port. So obviously 3333 is taken from me. Let's use 8888 instead of 3333. This is the port, right? So -p is for port, right? And let's try that out. So I go tiny-http-server and then -p8888. So listening on 8888, and then go here and then see if this craps out again. Yeah, it craps out. And the same thing goes with HTTP server, right? The other one, the other normal HTTP server. There's a bunch of different ones here, right? Here, this one. You can see it also has some usages, right? For HTTP server, one of them is the path and options, right? So you can also choose -p for port. So let's try that HTTP server, but map it to a different port. So HTTP-server, but mapping to 8888. Doesn't like that. Huh? Okay. Thank you. How that? Questions? Guys, thank you so much. See you next week. Remember that. What's due on Friday? What else? Lab 3 and assignment due, all due Friday. Please get all that stuff done, right? And so that we're all on track. Thank you.